Welcome back to Still a Part of Us. We have just had a wonderful, wonderful conversation with Kayla about her daughter, Cami. And this one was really, I thought it was super intense and also really hard for a number of reasons. So I recommend listening to that about Cami's story. Kayla, before we get started, welcome back, first of all. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to Cami when she was born?
So Cami was born just after 39 weeks after an uncomplicated pregnancy, and really an uncomplicated delivery until like the last hour. At some point leading up to delivery, during delivery, she suffered a lack of oxygen, blood flow to her brain, resulting in a brain injury, more specifically an hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy injury, that the outcomes ended up being very significant for Cami in terms of where the brain damage was. After adjusting to the life of living in the NICU for about 3 weeks and then coming home with a somewhat medically complex child and having a toddler at home, Cami got to live with us for just about 2 months before she passed away from just the impacts of her injury and her body not being able to handle those anymore.
Yeah. And it really I just can't it's so hard. There was so many hard things about it, and, so grateful that you were willing to share that with, us,
Mhm.
and as point of reference, when was she born? How long ago at the time of this recording?
So Cami was born on March 30th, 2022. So not quite 2.5 years ago at the
Yeah,
time of this recording.
yeah. So you've got a little bit of time since,
Hmm.
everything happened, and life is that's a big deal. Like, you
Hmm.
had a child that, there's a chance that if she continued to grow and be in your home, would have significantly changed
Hmm.
your life, your lifestyle with your family, with your husband, and,
Hmm.
I I'm curious what your thoughts were. I know that you work in as a clinical psychologist, and so you're very
School
familiar.
psychologist.
Excuse me, a school psychologist, and you're very familiar with some of this population. So, and you strike me as the type of person that is you prepare things. You
Hmm.
are very on top of just kind of figuring out what the situation is and seeing what needs to happen. So, tell me a little bit about what your thought process was when you were like, "Okay, we might be able to take her home. Okay, she's breathing on her own. Okay, we figured out how to do tube feeds." And
Hmm.
tell me what your thought process was when you were going home, and also like maybe discussion with your husband Ben about like what that was going to look like.
Hmm. Um, I think it. My thoughts were around getting like as much support as we could. Like we in the hospital, they kept talking about all the things you can do to just help. They kept talking about how the baby's brain is so like has so much growing to do and is so like it can be formed or it has so many connections to be made. And so all the enrichment and therapy and things that you can do to help that is only going to benefit her. Her neurologist would often say like these are often the outcomes I see, but every baby's different and the environment
Mhm.
has such an impact on that. So did a lot of for me, and maybe not so much I mean, some conversation came down to like planning, but just in my brain, I'm thinking about like, okay, what like we need to make sure we get started with PT and occupational therapy and probably feeding therapy at some point, just to like try and get some of that like reflex developed for her.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, like you said, I'm very much a planner. So, like thinking about our routines and trying to keep our oldest daughter, Hallie, on her like routine and meet her needs. And still, obviously, we have to fit into Cammie's schedule.
Yeah.
So, those were a lot of the like immediate thoughts. Once we knew that once we knew kind of she wasn't making as much
Mhm.
progress as they had hoped, the outcomes maybe aren't as positive as we hoped initially, that she was going to be with us. We just didn't know how long. Some of the fear and like thoughts about specific diagnoses, and because those would come when she got a little bit older, I stopped thinking more specifically about those.
Oh,
Just assuming that if we got to that point, they'd probably be a part of her life, but not knowing if we were going to
yes.
get to that point. And
Okay.
so that was such a hard place for our family to live in. Like, we have to plan for things, but also we don't know if we're going to get to that point that we'll need these plans.
Right.
And that limbo that we were in was one of the most challenging things.
Yeah, that is it would be frustrating. I just
Hmm.
would be like, "Where what are we doing?" Yeah. It's just like, "What do I need to prepare for?" 'Cause I'm a preparer as well. And so,
Yes.
um, yeah, that is tricky. That's a really tricky spot to be in. And kind of along with that, what tell me about your like, they talk about this thing called anticipatory grief, right? Like, you are anticipating something bad's gonna happen. Or right,
Hmm.
you're waiting for it
Right.
to actually come about. But it feels like the time that you had with her felt like almost like you were holding your breath, in the sense that you
Hmm.
didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, tell me about can you talk a little bit about that anticipatory grief and
I
um
think there were so many layers to our grief in the beginning, like
yeah,
grieving what we thought our life was going to look
right.
like pre-grieving almost what our family might look like. Because I think like in the first couple days in the hospital, we were like, how do you have more kids after this? Like, this was so traumatic. But knowing like
Yeah,
we always wanted a big family
right.
in the beginning, and so like grieving what our family might look like, grieving just like how our lives were going to be impacted,
Mhm.
like the flexibility of them and all of those
Yeah.
things. And then in the first weeks that we were home, like always being prepared for something bad to happen, but also trying not to live like something bad is going to happen. It was so hard. I think we really just lived like day to day, sometimes even just like hour to
Our
hour. Yep. And didn't like we were in such survival mode. And I think we got pretty, at least like speaking for myself, got pretty comfortable in like the stability. Once we got into a routine,
Mhm.
and got things kind of figured out, we were pretty comfortable. And especially in that week leading up to her death, when everyone was like using the words of stable and that she's a warrior, like we really, I think then started to let ourselves think about like more of the long term future and
Gotcha.
planning. And I mean, long term for us was maybe like end of the summer, the big thing being like me working,
Yes.
type of thing. So we really started to like revisit some of those conversations, and actually like that Monday, I think before she died, I emailed my boss and asked to set up a meeting to talk about like what my
Mm.
future of working would look
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
come the fall. And so we started to like allow ourselves to think beyond like today
Yeah.
and maybe tomorrow, because I think at first like trying to think too far was too scary and
Mhm.
too sad, thinking with the possibility that she might not be there.
Yeah. Yeah, you can only go I think your brain can only handle it feels like you can only handle so much
Hmm.
before it's like, "Whoa, I gotta peace out." And so
Hmm.
I think that was smart of you to just like, "Okay, we're gonna go this far, and then
Hmm.
we'll go this far." Um, so one of the things that I like to ask people generally is like, obviously you had a very interesting kind of time frame of grief while she was alive. And
Hmm.
then after she passed away, how was your grief after?
I mean, I think anybody that's like been through losing a child, like you just can't imagine like this is your life. And when we were in the hospital, we have relatives who have lost babies.
Yeah.
Whether it was years and years ago that we knew about, one of my husband's close friends has a brother who died at before like around a month old. And
Oh,
so, and we would talk about these people like we know that they kept living. They're here. They have these kids. Their kids are grown, but we don't know how they do it. Like,
yeah.
how are we going to move forward from this? We know people do it. We just don't know how it's possible. So
Yeah.
we talked a lot about that. Like, we know that we will, it just doesn't seem like we will.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just, in the early days, having a toddler at home was helpful in ways because
Mhm.
she made us keep living. She made us get out of bed
Yep.
and make food, at least, whether or not we felt ready to eat it at that time,
Yep.
depended. But so that was I mean, for us, I think it was good. Hearing, as I've talked to other people in this loss community, sometimes it was hard in ways because we also had raised a child to this point and knew what we were missing. We
Yeah.
knew we weren't going to see Cami learn to walk and learn to do
Yeah.
these things. And so that was hard in ways too, having another child that was living.
The
It was good and bad at
yeah.
times. It was hard some days when all I wanted to do was absolutely nothing, but you still had to take care of her. I think one thing that really helped was she still went to daycare, I think a couple days a week during the summer. So
Yeah.
there were still some days when
You
I could just do whatever I felt like I needed to do that day.
right.
But I remember there were so many like times where I would just like, again, use psychology words, but dissociate and
Mhm.
just like be staring off. I wouldn't be thinking about
Yep.
anything. I would just be like not there. And my husband would be like, Kayla, hey, like for a while before I finally like snap back, and he'd be like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm just gone, like
Yeah.
wasn't there. And I remember talking to my therapist. I'm like, is this something I need to be worried about at this point? She's like, at this point, that's just your brain protecting yourself right now.
Yeah.
Like it's okay for that to happen.
Yeah.
And so in the early stages, I remember like things like that. I really, that summer after Cami died, I read so many books because books are the one time where like I can completely disappear from what's
Y
going on. Because sometimes if you're watching a movie, your mind can still wander because you
mhm.
don't have to picture what's going on.
Yeah.
So I started reading like crazy that summer and read so many books as
Yeah.
like a coping mechanism. It also helped me to like be out of the house and doing stuff, just like
Okay.
trying to stay busy. So me and Hallie, like we did so many things like
Mm.
that summer too, just to try and stay busy and not, I think it was just a way to not be sitting at home where Cami should have been. And while I'm
Yeah.
so thankful that we got to bring her home and have those memories at her in our home, we then also had those memories with her in our home
Yeah.
where
It
she's
is.
not there anymore. And so it was
Yeah.
hard being home sometimes too.
Yeah. I mean, there's yeah, memories are great for but it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, you're
Right.
like, "Oh, yeah." You had the you were able to not be at work for a time.
Yeah. It actually, overall, like the timing of everything worked out. You don't want to say worked out well that your
No,
child
but
died at this time, but because she died at the end of May, I still
yeah.
had the summer off of work.
Yeah.
And then had made the decision that I was going to go back to work.
Okay.
But it gave me that time to get through like that immediate grieving
Yes.
and not have it be quite so raw
Right.
when I had to go back to work, which was so helpful for me.
Yeah, that having that those first few months are just so hard.
Mhm.
So, so
Mhm.
hard. And so to yeah, to have that kind of downtime, but also sounds like the routine really helped with Hallie to
Mhm.
like actually feel kind of normalish in the sense that you were
Mhm.
doing things that you would normally do with a toddler,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Right.
so now I suspect your husband did not he had to probably be back at work
Yeah, so when he
kind of
started
quickly.
back, shortly after we got home, when he started back, then he was back to his like normal working schedule of the
Okay.
24 on, 48 off, and then he does construction on his days off on the
Yeah.
department. But that's what he needed. I
He
think
needed
he
okay.
needed to be busy. He doesn't, even when things are going great, he doesn't sit and do nothing
Yeah.
well
Okay.
or like just have a lazy summer day well.
Right.
So it was good for him to be back at work. And there's one guy, especially at work, who is like one of the leaders of their like peer support group on the department,
Oh,
who actually came down to Iowa City just to like spend time with us, especially Ben, like check on us. It happened to be the day of the MRI. So it was like a good day for him to come down to
yeah.
like be with Ben. And so I think just knowing that he has some really good like support system people at work.
Yeah.
I've never like pushed him
Yeah.
to like pursue anything more because
Gotcha.
I feel like good about the people he has in his community too.
That will
So
support
I think
him.
it was important for him to be back at work.
Okay.
And that was kind of like his way of not forgetting, but stepping away from maybe like the reality of everything for a
Yeah.
while.
I
Um,
mean, just kind of like your brain would kinda dissociate, right?
right.
This was his way of just like,
Yep.
"Okay, I got a job to do while I'm here
Yep.
at work." I do think that's interesting. So they have a peer support group. Like, I suspect it's just, because
It's
fighting fires and being an EMT
yeah.
actually probably is pretty.
And I don't know that there's any, they've put on some different, and I missed the one that they had more recently. They've put on or like supported or sponsored like different like spouse almost support groups where like
Yeah.
the wives could go and like talk about different things. They have like a list of therapists that either they recommend or know people that have
Yeah.
recommended, check in on people after like maybe a more traumatic call.
Yeah.
Just different things like that is what I can speak to. I just know the one guy is just really, he's just like so good at like
Mhm.
being there for people and checking in on people. And at the time, he was on the same shift as my husband. He's
Mm.
since changed shifts, but
Yeah.
he's still like there
A very
for
yeah,
him in
okay.
the department and stuff. So um, yeah, that was good. Is good.
I think that's awesome that there's this kind of support system
Hmm.
in, obviously a very high stress, um,
Right.
like, vocation. And so,
Right.
yeah, so that is awesome that they have that, and then also sounds like for spouses as well
Hmm.
to support each other. Okay, so then after those first few intense weeks and months after Cammy has passed away, you start going back to work. And
Hmm.
how was that going back to work? Because I know that it sounded like a lot of your coworkers, a lot of your other teachers came and supported you at the visitation at the
Yeah.
graveside. How was that
Um,
transitioning
it
back in?
was it was good to get back into doing something like normal and something
Yeah,
where I had to like use my brain.
right.
Um, it was, and I went to therapy probably every 2 weeks for the first like 6 months after Cammy
Okay.
died. And worked a lot on, or I talked with her a lot about like getting back to work. And I talked to some other people about what helped you going back to work, what like, because
Mhm.
everyone, this is going to be this huge elephant that most people know about, but like some people might not. And
Mhm.
so after talking to people for my school, so with my job, I work for what's called like an area education agency. And we're like this large company that supports, we have services that then support all the school districts in our area.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so I'm employed by this AEA, but I'm assigned to a school
School.
building.
Mhm.
And so I work directly with the school, but then have all these AEA staff who I know but might not work as directly with.
Right.
But had, so just in talking to people and talking to my therapist before going back to work, I had sent an email out to the school staff that I work with, the people that I see day to day,
Mhm.
and just like let them know, like, hey, please talk. Like, it's okay to talk to me about Cami.
Okay.
Please do. Like, you making me feel sad isn't because I wasn't sad before. Like, if you say her name, it's not that I forgot that these bad things happen. Like,
Yeah, always
I'm
there.
going to be glad that you wanted to talk about it. You're not the one that made me sad. It's this whole situation and
Yeah,
the events that make me sad.
yeah.
Um, and I was kind of nervous about doing that, but I was glad that I did because I had one teacher who specifically came up to me like I saw her one day and she didn't really say hi or anything.
Mhm.
Um, but it was also like they were kind of running between meetings. So I didn't really think anything of it.
Yeah.
But then the next day came up to me and she was like, I'm really glad you sent that email because you're right. I didn't know what to say to you. And I didn't like, so I
Mm.
just kind of avoided you. And I was like, I get it. Like that probably used to be me. So it's okay.
Yeah.
So I was glad I did that. The one thing, and I don't know if it caught me off guard, but I was hoping wouldn't happen. It was hard. The hardest day I think was going back. So before the school year starts, our AEA, so my employer, has an all staff meeting, which is like 500 people, and we all go to their like main building.
Oh, okay.
So I was going to see a lot of my like coworkers who work in the same area who knew about everything, who I work more closely with, but I was going to see people who
You
like
have
I ran in, or I didn't run into, but I saw like the
on
team of
it.
people who
Yeah.
was doing Cammy's evaluation, who they had emailed
Oh,
me the day before she died with her like consent forms to start services. And then I had to email them the next day and say,
Oh,
I'm sorry that you did all this work, but she actually passed away yesterday.
yeah.
And so I had to see them again, which was kind of hard
Yeah.
because like they went through it with us in a way.
Yes, they did.
Um, and then there was one person who is like one of my favorite people at the agency who I don't work closely with, but me and my husband are actually friends with his daughter and son-in-law from
Mhm.
the town we used to live in. And so I just assumed that he maybe would have heard everything because like
Yeah,
his
just through
son-in-law was on the fire department with Ben and his
yeah.
daughter, like I assumed he would have heard through the grapevine. But when I ran into him that morning, he noticed that I had gotten a new tattoo, which is for Cami. And he was like, "Oh, is that new?" And he's like, "What's it for?" And so I was like, "Oh, it's for our daughter Cami." And just like by the look, I was like, she like passed away. And I like just wasn't expecting to have to explain it so like
During
early to people.
yeah.
And so I started crying, which I was prepared to cry unexpectedly.
Mhm.
But it just like caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting him to be the one that wouldn't know. But he
Yeah.
was also like the best person for that to happen because he is like mental health. He is such a strong, like, he's such a good supporter and he works or has worked in like other mental health fields
Yeah.
outside of his role at our agency. And so he was like the best person for that to happen to, but
Yeah.
that's the like one thing that caught me like the most off guard.
Totally, yeah.
And
Unawares.
it was hard being back. Um it was hard being like the person that people knew as like her baby died. Like not that that's how they introduced me. Which is funny
But
now that I
yeah.
don't feel like I'm known as that person
Mhm.
being 2 years out from that. I feel like it feels like people are forgetting that part of our story because that's not like the first thing they think of when they know me. And so it's kind of funny how that's like switched from me, how now I want to be that person who are like, "Oh, like that's the family whose daughter died."
Yeah.
Where before I was like, I don't want that to be our label.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's just like, I don't know, interesting how things change.
Yep. A funny dichotomy, which is like, "Huh, yeah."
Yeah.
We kinda joke, I have a group of, women that I meet with on occasion, but we call ourselves the sad moms group because 'cause you're
Mhm.
like they're known as the sad moms because um, just funny.
Right.
Funny labels that you
Mhm.
get because of what
Mhm.
you've experienced, so, now that it's been about 2 years, like, how
Mhm.
has your grief changed? I know that things look really different in your family now too, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you have another
So,
baby,
yep. Yep.
and
Um,
so, yeah, how did that change through even just that year and a half or so, even
yep.
after that?
So really pretty quickly after Cami died, I told my husband I wanted to have another baby. I just like needed to be holding a
Mhm.
baby. I was
Mhm.
like desperately missing that. And
Yeah.
he was kind of like, whatever you need, I don't care. So we actually unexpectedly got pregnant and ended up miscarrying that baby pretty, I mean, it was like 6 weeks, pretty early.
Yeah.
And then got pregnant with our son right, almost right away after that.
After.
And again, it was a smooth pregnancy. It was just very stress filled. Not only like all of our stress was around delivery. And so I knew
Yes.
I'm like, you can have the perfect pregnancy and everything go wrong at the end.
Yeah.
And so that was so like nerve wracking for us. But we had decided to have a scheduled C-section with him to like be in as much control of the situation as possible, have it like be a completely different scenario.
Yeah.
And it ended up being like perfect decision for us. He was actually due the day that Cami died a year
Oh,
later.
are you serious? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Which when we got pregnant, I was like, I told Ben, I'm like, it's gonna fall around that day. I know it's going to, just like timing wise. And then when we had like some early dating ultrasounds, it was May
Yeah.
25th. And at first I was like, this is doom. Like this is a doom filled day. But eventually, like, I was like, no, this is like hope. This is like their
Yeah.
connection. It's
Yeah.
meant to be this way. And it became like a good thing. He wasn't going to be born on the day because with a C-section, it's scheduled earlier. And
Right.
then he actually decided to come at 36 weeks.
Oh, okay.
He was just done cooking, which he would have been a giant baby if he didn't. So that was okay. Um, but it was also like his we decided to stay with the same doctor who delivered Cami because we
Uh-huh.
never had any like blame on the doctors. We never felt like they did something wrong or they missed something, which is something that was hard throughout the whole process because I feel like a lot of incorrect blame was placed on our medical team or like
Oh,
wonderings. I think like
from other
there's just,
people
yeah, from
outside
other
of
people.
okay.
And it was hard because we knew that not everybody, we didn't like talk a lot about our delivery story. And
Yeah.
so we knew a lot of people didn't know the details. So just, I think there were a lot of assumptions about like, oh, it should have been an emergency C-section or this should have happened. There were comments like if we would talk about that we were going to the same, like choosing to use the same
Yeah.
doctor, there would be like, oh, really? And those just really rubbed me the wrong way because we never held any blame for them.
Yeah.
In my eyes, I felt like they saved her, so we got time with her. Like that's how I always felt. And them having some of those like thoughts out there just made me feel like they were more like questioning us because we really, me, really made all those decisions in that time.
Yeah.
And even though I know that they didn't have all the information, that was really hard for
Yeah.
me to.
Definitely.
And then when the funeral home came to get Cammy, I know they were just doing their job, but this has stuck with me from that time. He had asked if we were going to do an autopsy because the talk of the town was that there was maybe like medical like malpractice or something that needed to be looked into. And I was like, nope, we don't think anything was wrong. And so it just like I hated that that this talk was like out there from people who had no idea what happened.
Oh,
And so, but we chose to stay with the same doctor because we felt like they saved Cami
her.
and
Yeah.
did what needed to be done. So she got to stay with us and
Yeah.
not and got to go to Iowa City and not just our time stayed in Waterloo that night. And at first Ben was like, do we even go to the same hospital? But for me, I was like, they went through it with us. Like, I feel like we're going to get a little bit special treatment
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
were there too.
Yeah, they saw it. They
Um,
were yeah.
right.
Oh,
And like
man.
they went through this trauma as well, like in a very different way. But and it ended up being it worked out, even though he came like I went into labor early.
Mhm.
She ended up being the doctor that was on call that weekend. So she still got to do the C-section. And because he was 36 weeks, he was an automatic like NICU baby, just
NICU.
because sometimes their lungs aren't as
Mhm.
developed. And so at
Mhm.
first that was kind of triggering.
Yeah.
And I was like not super happy about that, just knowing, but also knowing it was very different. But it was so it just ended up being like he was born and he did end up needing some like CPAP support.
Okay.
But the neonatologist who was the same one who was with Cami was very like, it's just because he has 36-week lungs. He's not sick. It's
Yep.
not anything that wouldn't be expected. Like they were so reassuring. One of the nurses that was Dax, our son's nurse, after I got back to our room, she was like, I don't know if you remember, but I was one of Cammie's nurses too. And so like just this whole team that was there with us with Cammie
Yeah.
was there with us with Dax. And it was like really like perfect and like healing and emotional and like all the ways.
Yeah.
After.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have made it through his pregnant. I went to therapy through his pregnancy
Yeah. Okay.
and did like EMDR, like
Mm.
trauma processing. And I
Yep.
don't think I would have made it through his pregnancy as easily maybe as I did without that support. Just worked through a lot of like things that might be triggering and which made me feel more comfortable. Like when we found out he was probably going to be or would be a NICU baby at first, at least. Like I think if I wouldn't have worked through a lot of that trauma, that would have been like too much to handle.
Yeah.
And just like even going back to the hospital would have been
That hard. Yeah.
challenging without
Mhm.
like working through that. So that I think was a big piece of like that year after Cammie's
Yeah.
death that was really like impactful in my journey.
Yeah. The, so let's kind of transition because I do want to make sure that we cover that
Hmm.
is some of the things that did help
Yeah.
in your the healing and processing and that type of thing. So you went and saw a counselor on a very regular
Yep.
basis, at least for the very
Yeah.
first 6 months, and then after
Yep.
that, still probably regularly.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I was going monthly for like the last
okay,
little bit.
gotcha. And did you ever do any counseling? you and Ben together as a couple
No,
or anything like that?
I
Okay.
never got him to go, and I never really like pushed him
Yeah, and
hard.
that's fine, yeah.
But no, that was never anything
Okay.
that, and I don't know. I mean, it would have helped in some ways, but also I don't know that we struggled because I know that like traumas like this can like
Mhm,
divide people. And we, even though we grieved very differently,
mhm.
it never like put a wedge in between us. I think we were
Okay,
both very understanding in like letting you do what you need to do and vice versa.
gotcha. So and also not just being judgmental of, like, different ways
Hmm.
of grieving, because
Right.
people can get really judgmental about that kinda thing, so,
Yes.
any other things that you felt like were extremely helpful in your
Um,
grief process?
yeah. I think early on, something that was also very helpful was connecting with a group. They're an international, but they started in Iowa and are now growing, or a national, I should say, started in Iowa and are now growing, but no foot too small.
Oh, yeah.
They're just a group that helps really like celebrate angels and bring moms together so that they're not
Mm.
alone in
Mhm.
their loss. In one of the first like virtual moms groups, so a Zoom meeting, where you just log on and can either share your story or just listen to other people share their story, was like in the week or two after Cami died. And I logged onto and just like cried the entire time, but shared our story and just felt like in that moment, I just knew that like I need to tell her story. Like I need to tell it as much as people will let me, to anybody that will listen. And so that group offering that space to do that, as well as just like not feeling alone, like being able to connect
Yep.
with people and become friends with people who really get it,
Yep.
was really helpful. And then just having a friend, as I've referenced, who had lost their daughter not long before Cami died, having somebody closer to us who also was like
Yeah.
navigating life with a toddler after losing your baby,
Yeah.
was helpful too.
That yeah. And she was, what? I think you said she lost her baby, stillborn baby in
Yep.
November,
Yeah.
and then you guys had Cammy and lost her in May. And
Yep.
so I just it really it's funny because I when you said that, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I had a friend that was, like, 6 to 9 months ahead of me in this
Hmm.
process," and it was really nice to have somebody that kind of paved the way. I mean, that sounds terrible to say, but
Right.
kinda paved the way and said,
Yeah.
"No, you can go this way, and it doesn't
And
have
just
to look
like
that
the
way." Yeah.
little things, like at the cemetery, I didn't know what the rules were in
Oh,
like
yeah.
decorating before we didn't have a headstone for almost, well, like 10 months because what we
Okay.
ordered just took forever. But I was like, I don't know what I can put out here. And so I wasn't putting a lot out. And it was Brenna who actually like put some of like the first decorations
Oh,
out for
really?
in like Cammy's space. And that's what like I was like, okay, I can do, like I can put things out.
Yeah.
And she like decorated her daughter's like headstone for like the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And I was like, you make that always so beautiful. And she made a comment that still like sticks with me and why I still like try and decorate for all the things for Cami. She was like, it helps me feel like I'm still taking care of her. And I was like, that's right. That's something we can still do. And so like just some of those things that I didn't even like know to like how to navigate or who to go to, she just like kind of did and was one of the first people to like just bring over some of those first like
Yeah.
gifts of
Yeah.
things that we still have like around the house and just who got it, even if it was like not forcing me to talk about anything, but just there doing
Yeah.
the things.
Yeah. They're doing the things I know. I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, I need to text my friend," because I was like, "Oh, I need to tell her how awesome she was." Because yeah, they just show up and give you quotes
Hmm.
and things that will be, like, so, so helpful in those early days that are just
Right.
so dismal and dark and hard. Um,
Hmm.
oh, yeah. Okay, and then you also mentioned I just wanna point out a couple of other things you mentioned during, this conversation and the birth episode, but
Hmm.
you talked about how people just because of the way you grieved and also just the way you worked, right? Like, you didn't really want people
Hmm.
in your space, you really wanted to make sure that if somebody's gonna be in your space, that it was somebody that made sense to be in your space, right?
Yeah.
And so you asked for meals because that was something people can do, and
Yeah.
honestly, that is a theme that comes up over and over and over and again because activities of daily living that kind of are a pain in the
Right.
butt when you don't have any you don't have a brain to want to worry about that
Mhm.
kind of thing. Any other things like that? Some of those small things that people did that you
Um,
wanna point out? Because I know people come on here just to find tips on how to
right.
support people. So, is there anything that stands out?
Not I mean, not like concrete things, but some of my, like, again, close group of friends who haven't like had child loss, they did and still do, and our families too, just like a good job of including Cami in all the things. Like the
Mm,
first Christmas after she died, me and my friends from college, we all get together and the kids exchange gifts. And it was really sad for me that she wasn't, I mean, the first Christmas anyway, but sad for me that she wasn't there. And they got us a lantern that has like silhouettes of all the kids, and then there's like a little angel baby like flying
oh,
on it too. So they just like, and like our parents and siblings, like they still either like make donations in Cammie's name, like for her birthday and Christmas
yeah,
and stuff, or they'll like get us like things with her name on it that we can put on her shelves or in the house
yeah,
or something for her garden that we have, or like at the cemetery. So just like people that haven't experienced it, but still really try to include her.
yeah,
And I mean, I was very open in the beginning that like on Facebook and whoever would listen, like we please talk about her, please include her. Like we're going to forever. It only helps us if other people do too. And so I think that that helped, helping other. And that was again something my therapist. She's like, tell people
yeah,
how you want them to behave because they don't know. And I was like, yeah, that's true. Like I never would have like the
yeah,
things that I now do for people who have experienced loss are not anything I would have done before because I wouldn't have known what to
mhm,
do. And so in that first year, I would still like make monthly posts when Cammy would be like 5 months old and 6 months old, and just like remembering her and really, and that was also me. Like everyone has this fear that your baby's going to be forgotten, and I think in making her still so part of our family, and like
yeah.
we got a birth weight bear made
Oh,
from
uh-huh,
the like newborn gown that she wore in the family pictures that we were able to get after we got
yeah,
home. And so that's in like all of our family pictures and like in our like baby announcements. It's in like she just included in that way and everything. And so I think that that helps people also know to include her as
yeah,
well.
yeah. Ah, that's really nice, just some of those tiny things. And
Mhm.
it doesn't take anything extra, just yeah, a little bit of thought
Right.
ahead of time,
Mhm.
and so kind of your family and your friends to include
Mhm.
her in those things because 'cause you're like, "Yeah, I have 3 kids."
Right.
It's a big deal.
Right.
I know Dax is really young, right
Mhm.
now, and heck, Hallie is very young as well still. So are you guys like I know that you talk about her, I'm assuming and you say that you have a little area that is hers.
Mhm.
Um, any thoughts on how you guys are gonna try and keep including her? Is it just more just talking about her? How are you guys gonna tell Dax about her that
I know. Right
you've
now with
never
Dax, we just like include him in like in the conversations. Usually it's like that we're having with Hallie. Like Hallie is really into, was I in your tummy first? And then who? And then who? And
Oh,
so
okay. Yeah.
like she comes out then. And I just like this last few months, like we had things of like when Cammy first died, I was like, I need her in everywhere. I don't want to be in a room where I don't feel like she's in there still. So we had like a lot of stuff on our like dining room table
Yeah.
and stuff. Well, we still have stuff on the wall behind me,
Yeah.
and those
Uh-huh.
shelves like off in the distance are like all of her stuff, and
Mhm.
there's stuff in our bedroom. Like it was a lot, and I scaled it back and like condensed it some these last few months because it was kind of overtaking. So she just is everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
Hallie talks about her honestly probably the most, which is
Really?
great because she doesn't have any like concrete memories with
Yeah.
her from
Yeah.
that young. But she knows that she was her sister. She like knows that she died and knows that it was Hallie and then Cammy and then Dax. And
Yeah.
so I'm hoping, I'm also like a little hoping that eventually Dax will be like, talk about how he knew Cammy before he came to us. Like, you know how
Yeah.
you hear those stories? I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe he'll surprise us with something like that someday.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm hoping that just because she's still so like present in our
Mhm.
lives that he'll know her. But it is hard, like getting like stuff, just like getting family pictures and making new memories and always having that missing piece. Like never, nothing's ever like fully happy
Yeah.
because we'll always have
There's
this piece missing.
Yep. Yep. You'll always be missing somebody in your family, and
Hmm.
that's hard to reconcile, right? I just yeah.
Hmm. That was like another part of the grief was like grieving my like happiness before this loss. Cause I'm like, I'm never going to be the same happy again. I'm always going to be happy and a little sad, like
Mhm. Mhm.
always. And that was like hard for me to accept. Like you're always going to be a little bit sad
Yeah.
no matter what's happening. But then you get used to it and it changes and it's not such a sharp sadness.
Yeah. It does change, and it kind of becomes a part of you as well, I
Mhm.
think, because 'cause we're 6 years out, and that I keep thinking, I'm like, "Oh, it's really different." I mean, it's yeah, not so
Mhm.
sharp. It's still there, but
Right.
it's, like, very much a part of, who we are as a family, as a person,
Right.
as people. Okay, one other thing I'd like to ask is, were there some things that people said or did that were maybe not as helpful that you would like to just maybe point out? I realize people are different and people have different
Mhm.
preferences for different things, and I know
Right.
that you even mentioned, you're like, "We needed to take care of ourselves, and that's why we told family to kind of I don't want you to
Mhm.
come over," that type of thing, and that some people would think that would be so crazy, like,
Right.
um, but at the same time, like, you need to take care of yourself. So is there anything that,
Right.
like, for yourself and maybe others can kinda take a note for their family member or friend
Um,
that they're
I
helping?
think I think something that I walked away from, and even now as I like hear about other stories, is just like assuming you know the story. Like that, I don't know, that
Yeah.
really impacted me, like
Yeah.
assumptions I felt like people were making. If you don't have all the information, which you likely don't, otherwise, just some of the, I don't know, like the comments that you always hear people share that aren't helpful. Like it was supposed to happen or it was meant to be this way, part of the plan. Even though like I knew those things were going to be said by some people. So I was like kind of prepared to not be as impacted by them because it's them doing the best that they can.
Right.
Um, so they maybe didn't affect me as much if I wasn't like prepared for them in talking to other parents, working through it with my therapist. Like we talked a lot about like how to handle other people type of things.
Yeah, okay.
Um, so I think that even though, like, they're not the things that you want to hear, I think that maybe I was, like, kind of prepared for them to just,
Gotcha.
like, brush them off.
Yep.
I think other things and that I can't say that there's been anything that's been, like, really big for us that wasn't helpful.
Mhm.
I do like, we've been very fortunate with our community of people around us. I think some of the things that have been more difficult just kinda go back to faith and not like, our faith has just changed
Mhm. Mhm.
since, like, how we were both raised, and I think that that has been hard within our family sometimes because our
Oh, I
views
see.
on and beliefs on things is very different than maybe how they think about things or feel
Yeah.
about things. So there's been times, but we don't really like make a big deal about anything. If something's come up, we just listen to them and then let it go
Let it
because
go.
we're like, it's not something to lose sleep over.
Exactly, to fight
Um,
over to yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, to have it cause a problem.
That's a good
But
attitude.
yeah,
That's a good
I
attitude.
don't, I really can't think of like big things
Okay.
anymore that like really were the wrong thing to do,
Yeah, okay.
which
I
is good. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is great. I think that's awesome, and people are so well-intentioned, and I do wanna point out, like, because you did say the first thing, and you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, is that people are assuming a lot of things about what happened, and
hmm,
I think, that it is nice when people ask sometimes.
yeah,
Because I that is one thing that I always appreciated was when somebody said, "So tell me what happened." And I
yeah,
can tell them what my story was, and so they understand and maybe
hmm,
making assumptions about certain things that they were not present for or
right.
don't have the full story for,
Yes,
was something that kind
I
of
also always appreciated if people were. I almost want to say like brave enough to
yeah,
like ask those questions,
yeah,
because it never felt like they were trying to be nosy or like they were
no,
just trying to understand and know.
yeah, yeah, all that was involved because once again, very, there's a lot that happened in those
Hmm.
2 months, right?
Yeah.
Leading up to everything, so I appreciate it. One other thing I just wanna also, point out that I really appreciate that you have done and you have talked about on several occasions is that you were an advocate for yourself, like, about what you and your family needed, and then also even just talking about Cammy, like, giving people permission that is like something that as a person that is grieving, you have no idea how much that makes a difference for other people that are trying to help you. They
Mhm.
want to know how to help you, and
Yeah.
being able to state what you need. You might say you don't know what you need, but if when you do figure it
Mhm.
out, sometimes just stating it that really helps somebody
Yeah.
trying to navigate how to support you. So
Mhm.
I just thought that was kind of cool that you were very vocal about what needed to happen. So
I think really that comes from just, like, the other supports I had behind me,
yeah,
helping me with that, but, yeah, I think that that made a big difference in our journey.
yeah. Kayla, I really so appreciate this conversation that we've had today. It's been super helpful. A really interesting look on grief. Like it really a very different, a very different type
Mhm.
of grief, actually. Many layers of grief, in fact,
Yeah.
in your story. So I appreciate you being willing to share that, sharing Cami
Yeah.
with us today. One, I just wanted to ask: is there any last thing that you'd like to say to our audience about any advice or anything you want us to remember about Cami or tell us about Cami that we may have missed?
Um, I think the thing I don't know that there was anything that missed, but I think if I want people as I want people to, like, remember Cami, I don't want them to remember this, like, tragic story, and the words of her neurologist have stuck with me ever since her follow-up appointment that they had where she called her a warrior,
Mm,
and I really feel like she did. She fought from the day she was born to be
yeah.
with us as long as she did, and that's, like, what I want people to think of her as this little fighter
Yeah.
who, like, gave it her all in her short life.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful to honor her that way and to have that very powerful title
Mhm.
for her for who she is. So, thank you again, Kayla. I so appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.